an object that's common to our experience here in America. It's a very common object. It's very easy to see what this is. It's very simple. Y'all know what it is?
No.
What is it? You don't know? Well, look. I know somebody here knows what this is.
An ink spot.
An ink spot. Well, it is ink, but it's not a spot.
It's a
A cow. Who said cow? Give that woman a hand. Give that sister a hand. It's a cow.
Oh, it is a cow.
You see it? How many see it now?
It's sideways, bro.
Only 2 people? Now you have to disambiguize this. It's not just separating foreground from background. You have to disambiguize this object in order to see it. Now I could walk you through it with a semantic network. I'm gonna do better than that. I could, tell you that it's an animal, it's a life form. Start from there, and then from that say what kind. It's an animal, not a plant. And I could say it's a mammal. I could just keep walking you through it, giving you more and more clues, and eventually that would help you to disambiguize that figure, and you would recognize it. But I didn't want to do that because that wouldn't have been fair. Because I wanted you to recreate this object from your experience. Now, how many still can't see it? Cannot see it? Okay. Let me help you out.
Oh, there it is.
Now,
I'm going to sideways.
still can't see it?
It's obvious.
Well, there it is. Now here it is here.
I see it. It's a black and white.
Now can everybody see it now?
It's white.
I have a series of these when I do talks on cognitive science and memory. I have to step people through to appreciate their cognitive processes. We take a lot of our experience for granted. Okay, there are eyes, for example. You have specific cells that only respond to edges. Some respond to arcs. Some respond to different colors. Some respond to contrast. And we have to create our reality. I got a whole bunch of illusions that I can show you to substantiate how a large part of our visual experience we actually create. Okay, inherently, biologically, that truly is biological. Okay? Now once you see this, you cannot not see it again. Why? Because you brought together that coherent, you reassembled from all those incoherent images. When you were searching your consciousness, trying to find what this was, trying to call up every image you could. Some people have said some fantastic things that they saw in this picture and go and draw it for them. That they see a woman laying down, and cats and birds flying and all kinds of images. But it's not what it is. Because we reconstruct a large part of our And so our social experience also, as I said at the very beginning, depends upon the context and the cultural setting. So when we look at a subject such as melanin, for example, we have to be wary that we aren't seduced by the properties because it has immediate value to us as a people. That we can't fall for the rap or the okie doke or whatever you want to call it. That even though it sounds good, I'm running out of time. I'm just about finished. Okay. So we have to be aware of that. Now, for those of you who may want to pursue studies of African people, here are some suggestions, particularly those in medical fields. Since I have a big interest in neuroscience now, I sort of wrote it from my own perspective. I'm being honest, but I think it has a lot. I think we can learn a lot from this. That we need to pay more attention to, in particular, the last three, metabolism and diet. That to a great degree, how we think, our capacity to think, is influenced by different types of carbohydrates, okay, complex sugars. That all sugar isn't the same. And I would advise you to avoid things with NutraSweet in it, because that's an artificial amino acid combination that for many people engenders the propensity for hyperactivity. Okay, so particularly those who are hyperactive, have hypertension, I would suggest, I'm not an MD, but I would suggest that you reconsider using things with NutraSweet and really pay attention more to what you eat, because that has a tremendous impact on all aspects of our being. That we just can't eat anything and everything. We have to be very selective. We have to be selective about the water that we drink. A lot of cities' tap water comes through lead pipes, for example. But generally they don't talk about that being a source of lead when children have lead poisoning. So we have to be aware of these types of things. Lastly, and I think most importantly, to do all this work, to talk about the myths, mysteries, and metaphors of not only of melanin, but everything, we have to reconstruct our value system, the system that allowed our more immediate ancestors to survive Jim Crowism, slavery, enslavement, the Middle Passage, entrapment on the continent, and so forth. That we always had a value system, and it revolved around, and different Africans have different terms for ma'at, but principally it's still the same. Principally it's still the same. And I call originally, religion was something that was natural. One naturally was bent back to that supreme source, or to life itself, originally. So you didn't have a formalized code of laws like Hammurabi brought the Mesopotamians. In Kemet, there wasn't a formalized code of laws until the Greek period and the Roman period, because it came from out of their experience. That, as Melanin Symposium says, that there was a system of ethics based on virtue. And he talks about the 7 cardinal virtues: truth, justice, order, balance, propriety, harmony, reciprocity. That there was no human failure, that there was no idea of original cosmic sin that every human being is born into or has to redeem themselves of. That is a Greek notion, not even a Hebrew notion. It is a Greek notion. And the Hebrews picked that up in the Hellenistic time period. And that's where that came from. That's how it got into Christianity, that we have to be redeemed. Because we have this pre-cosmic guilt on us. Didn't have that in Kemet or African societies. Now you find some Christians like this guy Fox on the West Coast talks about original blessing rather than original sin. So there wasn't any human failure. That morality, the system of morality evolved out of the love for life. That's something very different. If we could begin to appreciate life more, I think a new system of morality will come forth out of us. Really not new, a reconfiguration of what already is here, such that people are cognizant of that we'll see that it is possible to teach someone to correct their evil ways, that there's not forever disorder, because order will win out over time. But we have to help it out. We can't wait for divine intervention. In Kemet, they didn't wait for the Pharaoh to act before the people acted. They acted out of themselves, out of their heart. So Ma'at was a doctrine of the heart. And when we get back to something like this, then we can begin to critically analyze all aspects of our experience, to separate the mysteries from the myths, and the myths from the metaphors, and the metaphors from the mysteries. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank again Dr. Hunter for this wonderful, wonderful address. And we would like to ask him to entertain a very, very, very brief question and answer period. So if some of you have one or two questions that you'd like to ask, please come oh, they're already running over there. I'm going to say, please come over to the microphone. And we're going to try to keep this short, so not 2 minutes, just a few. I have some other things that I'm also going to say after.
Hotel. I found it most interesting when you spoke on language. I have been working over the past 5 years on a dictionary and a thesaurus called Afro-Needy, the Meta-African World Language, and to be able to highlight what we call the sacred teaching of the people that we identify as Afro-African. Now I'm saying this to say this, the question. When we begin to define ourselves, a lot of times we get into some serious problems. What do you mean Afro-African? I'm not no Afro-African. What do you mean Afro-Needy? There's no place called Afro. But what they do not understand, our definition of Afro, the Afro means greatness. They are created by the composite of the Hausa, the indigenous Cherokee, the many different people from the continent, and the interconnection of people throughout the world. So when we come up with these new terminology, and within the philosophy of Afrocentricity, it begins to get kind of bothered and heated. I want to ask you about the language colonization, because I see a serious problem within the so-called scientific field, even beginning with the name science itself, on point of definition, crisis of identity, Jesse Jackson decided to pick up on the urban course that we are African American, what is absolutely nonsense. This is why in ancient Kemet, we've been here all night and forever. Anyway, my question is here. How do people begin to understand the concept of wisdom and to understand that within language must be a parameter, a paradigm for our eventual emancipation as a people? We cannot continue to use these same terms, these same words, and all of that if we're going to be a free people collectively.
Well, I answer that in two ways. First off, the language that we're using now, whether it's French or English or Spanish that African people use, whatever European language, Afrikaans, what have you, just because that's what we're speaking today, that doesn't mean that's what we'll always speak. In time, languages have an evolutionary process themselves, and they bifurcate, they branch out and become, and you have finer and finer distinctions. But also, there are some scholars working to construct what are the fundamentals of different African languages. Shayanta Diop and Theophilo Binga are two who are working to do that. And so we must begin to do that ourselves to help reconstruct. There's at least 800 different African languages on the continent, and there are variations spoken in different places. So there are people who are working to deal with that. And language is something very significant because that formulates categories of our experience. So we have to become more sensitive to the language that we use. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for a very, very enlightening talk. What I'd like to know is this. What I'd like to know is, has any research been done into the neurological aspect of melanin? Like, for instance, I've been thinking of it in terms of like the psychotic and mystic states of life. Like how, like a central feature of all life. I don't know if any research has been done into that.
Well, yes, there's a lot of correlation between so-called dream states and mystic states of consciousness and certain hormonal analogs of melatonin. There's a lot of work done there because we find that many societies, when they take fly or agaric mushrooms or some other plants, their chemistry, their structure is very similar to melatonin. Okay, so they end up going to sites in the brain where melatonin would normally go. So they compete for it, and that leads towards these various states of consciousness. So there's a lot of work that's been done and still being done.
Can you recommend any books?
Well, if you want to deal with plants themselves, there is a book called Plants of the Gods. I can't think of the authors right offhand, but that's the title. You can find that. If you want to talk about other states of consciousness, Dr. Richard King's book, The African Origins of Biological Psychiatry, he talks about African notions of various states of consciousness, particularly in chemistry. So those are two things that you can look at.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for a very informative discussion. We've had a lot of data collected on melanin. Could you give us some sort of idea of where we are on that continuum of facts, the information, the knowledge, the wisdom, and understanding this molecule?
Okay, for a good source of data that deals specifically with melanin itself. I think we have an excellent review by Frank Barr that appears in the July 1983 of Medical Hypothesis. The entire issue is devoted to melanin, the organizing molecules, as he calls them. And from that, you can move on to a lot of other areas. He has about 800 references in that article, so it's a very good source. To look at other aspects more in the area of blackness, of myth, then you can look at Dr. Richard King's book, African Origins of Biological Psychiatry. I'm sure bookstores here in New York have it. And that can lead you to a lot of other sources as well. Thank you. And by the way, I did bring some books with me that you might want to consider. Science as a Cognitive Process Towards an Empirical Philosophy of Science by Robert Rubenstein, published by University of Pennsylvania Press, Science as a Cognitive Process. To show you how things are changing today, Global Mind Change by Willis Harman, published by Knowledge Systems Press, about the changes that are taking place in Western societies today, how in many ways they're becoming more Afrocentric, if you will, to use a term. Willis Harman. This is the first book here, The Science Question in Feminism by Sandra Harding, that gives a very good update on more mature feminist thinking regarding science. And she even has a chapter on us in here, on the Afrocentrists are here. And she even has a few insights. She looks at Diop, and I'm surprised. You don't see too many Europeans quoting Cheon's Diop. Anti-Racist Science Teaching, edited by Don Gill and Les Levideau, by Free Association Press, published in Great Britain, but I'm sure you can find it here. I think Cornell University Press distributes it. Anti-Racist Science Teaching. You all need something like this. African Philosophy. This is a series of articles that have appeared in very obscure philosophical journals on the continent and here, and also in Europe. It's a collection of them. African Philosophy, the Essential Readings. It's a very provocative book. Unfortunately, there are some problems with this in that they're only talking about Africans of the continent who have thought about philosophy, not Africans outside of the continent. So it does have some limitations. It doesn't talk about indigenous African philosophy. There's only a couple of papers that deal with that, and none of them talk about chemistry. But it's very good because it does talk about intense debate. Even some Africans raise the question, is there an African philosophy? Has there ever been one? Okay, and this is by Tsay, and I'll spell his name, Tsenay, that's his first name, Serequeberhan. And it's published by Paragon House. African Philosophy, the Essential Readings. And it's there's a number of very good pieces. All of them are good because at least it gives you some dimension of the thought concerning African philosophy currently. Yes, the next question.
Yes. Could you please tell me what is the molecular formula for melanin?
What is the molecular formula? Well, I showed a picture of it at the very beginning.
No, well, no, just to, I'm just interested in knowing really the elements which are in melanin.
Well, melanin is a very amorphous molecule, and it can have, it has a carbon ring structure, but also that structure can be surrounded by, surrounding various metal ions, such as magnesium, sometimes calcium, iron, heavy metals, cadmium, lead, and so forth. So it's a very amorphous structure. It doesn't stay the same. It's not the same. The melanin molecule present in skin is not exactly the same as the melanin in your inner ear, for example, or the melanin in your eye. And all of them are completely different from neuromelanin, because neuromelanin is formed not by the enzymatic process that melanin in the skin, eye, and inner ear are formed. It's formed by a different process.
Okay.
Actually, yes.
Yes, my reason for asking that question is inherent in the word melanin. It's the word black.
Yeah, it means melanos means
Greek,
black
right?
in Greek, right?
Exactly. Now,
Black
from
substance.
some research that me have done, there was a formula given, and because this is my first opportunity to speak to someone of your caliber,
Yes.
dealing with this study, that's why we asked the question.
Yes.
And so we wanted to see whether the formula that was given to me would agree with what you would say. However, the formula given to me is C17H98 O33 N14 and S. Okay, now do you know the genetic code elemental formula for black people?
I said the what?
Do you know the genetic code?
The genetic code?
Yes, elemental formula for black people.
I think if I knew that, I could really, one, if I wanted to be a capitalist, I could make a lot of money. There's a $1 billion project called the Human Genome Project that's being funded right now, where you have a massive group of scientists all across the country, in fact the world, who are trying to understand the human genetic code. There's upwards of 200,000 different genes, and they all haven't been broken down, nor have they all been categorized, nor do we all know what they're for. So I don't know.
As a biophysicist, would you agree that there is a black biochemistry and a Caucasian biochemistry? That's two separate biochemistries I'm talking about now. Would you agree to that?
No, there's not two separate biochemistries.
So
There's different. Our physiologies, in many cases, are different, and therefore, on a molecular level, may process things differently to some degree. But if we were entirely different, as you claim, well then we would be like other different species that cannot mate, for example. That we can't be that specifically different. It is impossible for Europeans and Africans to be that specifically different. Someone would be something other than a human being. We're still part of the same family. They are still us. Europeans are Africans. They come from us. We were there in the north and got trapped and suffered the consequences. So there's not any separate biochemistry. Of course, different concentrations of different chemicals, melanin if you will, since we're talking about that, allow for differences, but there's not separate biochemistries.
Okay, my last thing to you. Could you comment briefly on phenylketonuria in relation to melanin? Thank you. Just briefly a comment on phenylketonuria in relation to melanin. Because as you know, phenylketonuria is an inborn error in metabolism which only affects our Caucasian brothers. And we as blacks don't have that inborn error of metabolism.
But there's lots of, you see, there's lots.
We're talking about phenylketonuria in relation to melanin.
Well, I can't speak to that, but I'll speak to it like this, is that different people, different ethnic groups have different genetic problems. I mean, that's how the whole science of eugenics came to be in the first place, to correct problems that Europeans had. Okay? So we run, see, that can go a lot of different ways. And when we can become victims to the same kinds of eugenic arguments. So we have to be very careful when we pose those questions, such that we understand exactly what we're saying, not just to ask the question just for clarification, but what's the motive for the question? You know, I need to understand that. We all need to understand why we ask them such, different kinds of questions. And many scientists, most of them don't talk about the motives. They just raise questions because they're in the pursuit of knowledge, the search for truth's sake. But there's always, in many cases, another dimension to that search.
It's getting a little long, and we're going to allow you all to ask your questions, though, but because we're having a reception, we thought that perhaps at the reception, then you could ask Dr. Adams your questions, but of course he might like to eat too. But we thought that perhaps you could continue with this in the area where we're going to have the reception. I hate to cut you off, but it's been rather long, and the questions are getting kind of long and drawn out. So if we continued with them, we would be here for a while. But what I'd like to do before you leave, though, is to just thank a few people who helped us out today. I'd like to acknowledge the committee members. That's Professor Edith Rock, Dr. Robert Johnson, Dr. Sheila Mayers-Johnson, Mr. William Foster, and myself, Viola Thompson. And I'd also like to thank the faculty participants of our roundtable this morning. That's Dr. Doris Withers, Dr. Patricia Ferdinand, Dr. Ovid Isaac, Dr. Ann Brown, and I'd like to thank B.K. Anderson for putting on a wonderful children's program, and she did that in conjunction with Mr. Richard Bartlett, and he's our graphic artist. He did the logo on the front of the program, and his class, from PS5, also participated. I don't want to leave out anybody. I'd also like to thank Professor Yvonne Bennett, Student Government Association, and Dr. Jackson for their support in this program, Dr. Mary Manu for her help and support. Yes. Yeah, I said Bill Foster. I sure did. I'll call Bill Foster again. I already called him. Okay, Mr. Tony Akeem, he helps to secure our vendors for today. Media Services was great right from the morning through Mr. Yasdani and Derek, and Richard Green for always participating, and I know, ending. And Fatima, who was a student volunteer from the morning, who also helped, and everybody else who helped support this event today. And